Alright, I just saw The Deer King in theaters, and that was a pretty fun time. This new fantasy epic from Masashi Ando, I believe this is his directorial debut, but he's kind of a legend in the anime industry for so many decades of work. In particular, he's worked a lot with Miyazaki at Studio Ghibli, and Satoshi Kon over at Madhouse did character designs for Princess Mononoke, animation director for stuff like Spirited Away and Perfect Blue and Tokyo Godfathers. So, a legend in the industry. So this movie got a lot of hype in that regard. And on that end, I can definitely say this anime was certainly a treat. Visually speaking. This was a very gorgeous film. Absolutely incredible attention to detail in terms of the character acting, in terms of the backgrounds and environments. So many interesting environments that are familiar enough for you to immediately get what it's supposed to convey, while also having their own flares to them so that they don't come off as completely generic. One of my favorites is this sort of valley that they kind of walk through, where the exposed rock wall is just very bright red color with white quartz sticking out of it, and that one just kind of stuck in my mind for some reason as just looking particularly cool. Really strong character design work as well. I guess the overall aesthetic reminds me of, obviously Princess Mononoke definitely comes to mind in a lot of ways. But it also reminds me, in terms of the color palette, and I've only seen one episode of it, but it reminds me of Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit, which was also a production IG work like this series. I don't know if Ando worked on that or not. I'm not entirely sure. But it's got that very fantasy epic with supernatural tinges to it that you're aesthetic that you're kind of familiar with from anime. And I'm not going to say it perfected it there, but it is definitely one of the best attempts at this particular aesthetic. And I very much vibed with how this film looked. And just the use of color in this film is pretty striking overall. There's some really great, out-of-body moments where they really play with the supernatural elements and get a lot more, not surreal, but more, just abstract, that's the word. More abstract with what it's trying to portray, and it comes across really well. And more on the realistic side, it's got some phenomenal action sequences, just really, really good in terms of visuals. And I could say the same for the narrative as well. This is it's not particularly groundbreaking in any regard, but honestly, what film is at this point? But what I mean by that, I guess, is it's safe, I guess. It's a very safe, tried and true narrative that doesn't particularly budge, except in a few details, which I will definitely highlight because those are probably the most interesting parts of the film. This is sort of it definitely wears the skin of the daddy-daughter or I guess daddy-adopted-daughter road trip kind of stuff that we've been seeing a lot in the past decade, especially in the past few years with anime. And again, I think this is one of the better attempts at it, if I'm being honest. The relationship between Vaughn, our lead character, and Yuna, this child that he basically adopts after breaking out of a mine that he was imprisoned in. The relationship between two of them is really solid, and you it never feels too saccharine or too beating you over the head with the daughteru energy. it's just a nice, solid relationship between a grizzled old soldier and yeah, adopted daughter who's basically kind of cleansing his soul, and that's really great. Just a really great and dynamic to ground the film in, as all this other supernatural and political stuff is happening around it. And I think the political stuff in particular is, it could have been a lot more interesting, I guess, but I think it was good for what it gave us. There was a brief little interview with Masashi Ando before the film started, where he kind of highlighted that one of the main plot elements of this film is that there is a plague that's killing off people by the thousands, essentially. And he kind of drew parallels to the COVID pandemic that we've been living through here in our real world. And I don't know how long this film was in production. I'm going to assume it was in production well before COVID hit, because that would be a real fast turnaround for a movie if it was in production, if it started production during COVID. So I'm going to assume that it's just sort of a bit of a coincidence, but they do kind of lean into that in certain regards. How, like, there's different sects of people who are approaching how they deal with the plague in different ways. Some people are utilizing it as a tool to destroy their enemies, I guess. That was a weird take, but I also read somewhere, or there was a tweet I saw the other day that's like, if you read entirely in everything as allegory, then you kind of go off the rails really quickly. So, yeah, I'm starting to ramble about this shit. Where was I going? But yeah, there's just a lot of really interesting elements in how the disease is presented. Some people are utilizing it for their advantage. Some people are just, like, there's a particular sect that it's just like, no, we don't need medicine. We can just beat it with the power of our souls and prayer. And man, that sounds very familiar as an American. Extremely familiar. And there's a doctor character in this who's just constantly trying to figure out, okay, there has to be a cure, some kind of cure for this disease. I need to figure out what it is. This guy appears to be immune to it, so I'm going to follow him through the entire movie and try to get my hands on his blood. And he turned out to be a really cool character as well, with just how dedicated to his research he is, and just never giving up on trying to better the world through medicine. And they do a nice job of, like, making it, I guess, historically accurate, I guess, even though this is a fantasy world. But, like, they make an effort to be like, this is still, like, primitive medicine of sorts, and this guy is sort of on the cutting edge of it, and it's got that nice little vibe to it without making it seem too out of place. But yeah, there's just a lot of and kind of going along with the different ways that the disease is utilized throughout this movie. They really weave that in well with the central dynamic of Vaughn and Yuna, where they, without spoiling it, through some supernatural means, they end up being connected to this disease as of sorts. And so we constantly see throughout the film these two just kind of being used for other people's purposes, or being directed in certain ways for other people's purposes, and the central idea of I just want to be my own to live my own life. I want Yuna to live her own life and just be free from the control of these other people who are trying to force their own desires onto us. That was a pretty cool idea to weave in there. A lot of the ideas, all of the central like ideas and concepts for this film are very interconnected in interesting ways, and I think that's definitely one of the film's strongest points, along with the dynamic between Bond and Yuna. As now, it's not. I didn't vibe with it completely. There was a lot, especially in terms of like the actual plot. There's a lot of stuff that's just either left completely unexplained or just not elaborated on enough to like make it make sense in my brain, I guess. Just a lot of small details here and there that end up kind of piling up by the end. Not deal breakers in any sense, but it does get sort of frustrating. You're like, well, hold on, wait, go back up a bit. I still don't understand all of this. But yeah, overall, still really solid story. Again, accompanied by some phenomenal animation and a really great soundtrack. I don't know who did the music for this. I'll have to look it up later, but it definitely sounds Joe Hisaishi adjacent. He's the Ghibli composer, the big Ghibli composer. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was him, because there's some very big and bombastic orchestral pieces in this film that really sell you on some of the bigger moments. I love just a full brass section hitting you with everything it's got. It's just so good. But yeah, would definitely recommend seeing The Deer King. It's probably going to be out of theaters by the time any of you see this, but when it hits Blu-rays or streaming services or however you decide to check it out, give this one a go. I'm feeling like a decent to strong 7 on this one. Again, there's a lot of elements that I just didn't vibe with, and the plot could have been a little clearer in certain areas. Oh, and there's another thing. With a lot of films like this, there's usually like a seemingly out of nowhere supernatural bend at in the third. I don't even know if this is a 3-act movie per se, but in the final stretches of the movie, there's usually like a out of nowhere supernatural element. This film does a great job of not making that jarring. It still could have been explained a little bit better, in particular with how Yuna is connected to all of it. Well, I mean, yeah, they do kind of explain it well enough, but it feels like it feels a little jarring how they introduce her element into it in certain areas. But overall, the supernatural in this is sort of woven throughout the film, so it doesn't feel like it's pulling the rug out from under you at the end with some weird supernatural stuff. But yeah, feeling a decent-ish 7, decent to strong 7 on The Deer King. Looking forward to what else Ando decides to put out if he decides to do more like this in the future. That's about it for this video. I'm currently in the middle of my seasonal wrap-up show, so you'll see some of those videos coming out soon. So look forward to that. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.